Thank you so much for letting us into your homes during these extraordinary times. We are grateful. The Beat with Ari Melber starts right now. Hi, Ari.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you very much. Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber, and we begin with the kind of breaking news that most presidents do not go through in an entire term. We have breaking news, and here is the context. The FBI director is the only presidential post that serves a 10-year term to protect law enforcement from partisan pressure. That's why it was such a big deal when Trump fired James Comey. That was in his very first year in office, and that ousting of a director in the middle of his term was so suspicious, it actually helped spark the Mueller probe, which unearthed and convicted many crimes. Trump replaced Comey with Wray. His confirmation hearings included scrutiny on Trump's bid to try to take more partisan control of the FBI and what Wray thought of the 10-year term, since he would be reporting to the president, who wanted to use the threat of another firing to try to take that partisan control. So while we're going to get into all of the breaking news, I always try to give you the facts and context first, and this news only makes sense if you remember that Wray himself testified under oath that the 10-year term was the right approach for that independence.
I think the FBI director has a 10-year term because there is a judgment made that the role of the FBI and the role of the FBI director needs to be one that is independent of partisan politics.
Wray saying under oath, you have to be independent. You have to hold strong to the term against those partisan pressures, which were very clearly on display from then President Trump. So keep that in mind, because the news tonight is that Wray has now announced he is quitting early. He will resign, he says, at the end of President Biden's administration. And now I'll show you what he might have hoped you only saw in isolation without the context and the history I just showed you. Mr. Wray offering a new and opposite rationale of what he said under oath. Contradicting what he said, that the 10-year term is what protects independence, he now just sort of blithely says the opposite, that quitting early will avoid his bureau from being dragged further into the partisan fray.
After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. And in my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray while reinforcing the values and principles that are so important in how we do our work.
Well, both explanations cannot be true. Where we got here from is the entire Trump partisan pressure vengeance campaign that you've been hearing about for many years. So even if you only occasionally follow the news, you're probably familiar with the context, that the pressure is from Trump, who vowed to fire Wray next month. He's already named someone to replace him, which is what you do when you have a vacancy, right? He wants to push in a controversial partisan warrior, Kash Patel, who has talked about closing down FBI headquarters and abusing police powers against the so-called deep state or political opponents or journalists or all the above. Wray replaced a director who was controversial for many reasons, but James Comey did not buckle to Trump's demands for loyalty. He documented them as evidence and just kept on working. He certainly did not quit in advance. In fact, a later federal investigation showed it was Comey's independence, among perhaps other things, but the independence is really what got him fired by Trump. People who take an oath to the Constitution are supposed to withstand pressure. And by definition, pressure and threats includes the carrying out of those professional threats. They're supposed to be able to take a firing over carrying out illegal orders. Former FBI Director Mueller was long the gold standard for leading the FBI beyond partisanship. This is something that there used to be some agreement on. Wray, tonight, fails those precedents. He resigns early, run out of the Bureau by this long-running partisan campaign, which he has now oddly helped. Because had he stayed in office, Trump would have had to at least decide to fire another director in order to get his way. Now the president-elect can say he's just filling a vacancy, which there will be. Wray caving today also shows how these partisan efforts can be effective. A nonpartisan official whose job was not supposed to end with Biden's administration, who was literally picked by Trump in the first place, is now surrendering in advance in public. Normalizing this FBI director role is now something that at least more partisan presidents could bend to their will. Remember, there are valid criticisms of Joe Biden. We've covered them, but Joe Biden, when he came into office, did not replace the FBI director, even though this was one chosen by Trump. Now, across 2 terms, going into this next one, Trump has effectively hobbled this big post-Watergate reform. It was the FBI that was abused in Watergate in all sorts of ways. That is what some of these people quite directly want to do now. It's happened before. That's why when Americans say, oh, how bad could it could get as bad as Watergate or worse. Remember, they didn't have Fox News and Elon Musk running Twitter during Watergate. So this reform that was supposed to bolster FBI independence from Nixonian meddling is crumbling, sadly, with partly the help of FBI Director Wray just cutting and running, quitting early. And that's why reaction to the news today has focused on this point.
Really unfortunate. A 10-year term should be a 10-year term.
Feels like, he's not going to get a profile in courage.
The whole point is to have that position be outside of direct political influence.
We set up an FBI director to have a 10-year term, so they're not going to fall under undue political influence.
What you hear there is a DOJ vet and some lawmakers just restating that premise, which Wray himself testified about more than once in those hearings I mentioned.
10-year term specifically contemplates that there could and almost inevitably would be changes in administration during the course of the tenure. And unlike other presidential appointees, the theory is, I think, rightly, that the FBI has both a criminal law enforcement and an intelligence role that sort of transcends political policy positions and needs to be kind of kept apart and above from that.
Kept above those politics, and he says the term does that, quote, I think rightly, under oath. Wray testified on that point during a specific period of time when Trump's move against the FBI was widely viewed as beyond the pale, when many in Washington were bracing for the ensuing probe, what they called the Mueller probe, that people thought would be a significant thing, might hobble his presidency, might get people in trouble, certainly got a lot of his aides in trouble. And the Comey firing, remember, was still roiling the Capitol.
President Trump has fired James Comey as the director of the FBI.
It is an unusual move that hasn't happened since the administration of Bill Clinton.
A day after James Comey testifies on Capitol Hill, he fires the director of the FBI, who is currently leading an investigation into the president's campaign.
In fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story.
President Trump has just announced he's nominating former Department of Justice official Christopher Wray as the new FBI director.
Wray was his pick to replace Comey, and he went through a heck of a lot through that decision, the ensuing investigations. But Wray is not good enough for second-term Trump. That is a sign. It is a type of partisan admission. The very person he picked doesn't fit with what they want to do now, as he publicly vows retribution, as he vows to pardon people who attacked police officers and tried to kill lawmakers, Republican and Democratic alike, as if there should be any such partisan distinction. So what we are going into is very clearly as bad as what they tried to do last time, and worse, because it's farther for what they want to do this time. It is not a time to tune out. It is not a time to give up. It is not a time to surrender in advance to nonpartisan principles of justice and the rule of law, what they used to call the American way. And I say that even knowing that the director of the FBI did very clearly surrender in advance today.
I think the FBI director has a 10-year term because there is a judgment made that the role of the FBI and the role of the FBI director needs to be one that is independent of partisan politics.
Chris Wray explaining the 10-year term when he was testifying. He breaks that term himself today, quitting early. We're joined by the former FBI General Counsel, Andrew Weissman, who also served as a Mueller prosecutor and as an MSNBC analyst, and a former assistant director to counterintel at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi, a 25-year veteran. Welcome to both of you. Andrew, I emphasize and Chris Wray had emphasized how different this post is than most others. Your thoughts on him quitting early today?
So I think one thing I'd add, I mean, I thought your intro was dead on, and it's the 10-year term that makes this such an important story and framing what's happening and sort of the quitting in advance and what it does to sort of the Kash Patel nomination, which, you know, he, I think by all accounts, you know, in a dispassionate look at his qualifications, you know, doesn't have the experience to run this, leaving aside any sort of political views and policy views. I think the other thing I would look at is on Monday, Senator Grassley had written a letter to Christopher Wray that outlined all of his perceived failings in the senator's view. And it's clear that the hearing was going to be, in many ways, a referendum on Chris Wray, and he was going to be attacked, maybe fairly, maybe unfairly, or some of each. That should not be, and I hope it was not, a reason for his decision. And it's also something you're supposed to welcome as the FBI and as FBI director, which is congressional and public scrutiny of your actions. That was, as Frank knows, that was a huge tenet of Director Mueller, which was complete candor about what you did and if there were failings, and owning it and talking about how you were going to rectify it. So, you know, that's something that I think, you know, personally, I would have preferred to see Chris Wray stay on. And if that was going to be the heat he got from the congressional hearing, that's part of taking the job.
Yeah, and we'll remind people, you were general counsel to a law enforcement agency that's like being the lawyer to the place where law enforcement is done. You deal with the sort of trickiest, toughest problems. If you were sitting there with this or any other FBI director saying, well, I don't know, they want to get me out anyway, they're already naming my successor, I feel a lame duck, what would you advise him about the 10-year term and his obligations?
I would say this is not about you personally. Scrutiny of your actions is part of the process and should be welcome by anybody who's serving the public, and particularly in a role such as the FBI director. And I would have gone back to the director's own words that you have now played, which is the reason for the 10-year term, that it is so important to a democracy that law enforcement be above the fray. That is the reason for the 10-year term. It is and it's palpable at the FBI. That, you know, when I got there, that was one of the striking things. In Washington, there's so much politics. Everyone thinks about the Senate and the House and the White House. Not the FBI. The FBI under Director Mueller was like, you know, it's like the old dragnet. It was just the facts, and let that govern what's right to do.
Frank?
Yeah, Andrew and I are of one mind on this. This decision to leave in the middle of your 10-year term further erodes the image of the FBI and sets a precedent that, yeah, you know what, we scream about the FBI being perceived as political, but we're actually kind of political because we're going to give in to a president-elect who has said, I intend to get rid of you. I don't like you. I don't like what you've done. And what has Christopher Wray done to invoke the ire of a president-elect? Well, he had the audacity to follow the law and get a magistrate signing a warrant to retrieve classified information that was being hidden, that had not come forward after a grand jury subpoena. He had the audacity to go on Capitol Hill and say January 6th was an act of domestic terror. He had the audacity to detail FBI agents to the Bob Mueller special counsel Russia inquiry. All of that was actually doing his job. And he shouldn't be saying, you know what, for the good of the organization, I'm getting out now. I don't think it's for the good of the organization.
It's clearly not. It violates his own past claims, which is why, again, as you say, it looks very political, but it feeds into this cynical problem where the biggest cynic gets everyone else to sound more cynical, which reinforces the cynic's argument that, oh, it was all BS to begin with. There is a contrast here. There are ebbs and flows in history. And I want to play just a little bit of how other presidents have sounded compared to Trump.
Mr. Mueller will succeed a good and honest man, Director Louis Freeh, who has my respect and the gratitude of our nation.
How bad Comey was. He's a showboat. He's a grandstander. The FBI has been in turmoil.
During these past 9 years, Judge Webster has done more than maintain the standards of the FBI. He has raised them.
Are you going to fire the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, who you appointed?
Well, I can't say I'm thrilled with him. He invaded my home. I'm very unhappy with the things he's done.
A direct admission that it's not about policy or the American people. It's just about the fact that he got in trouble for materials which they had to search for, and they were there. It might have been a really different call if they did a whole big search and they didn't find the material, right? And you'd say, well, they have that authority, but here they were vindicated on that. Whether or not it went on to trial, he's now the president-elect. So, Frank, how do you think this is likely viewed based on your, again, 25 years experience? You gave the bulk of your career to this organization, and Andrew worked there for quite a time at a high level. How do you think this plays within the Bureau, which is looking at someone like Patel coming in?
The culture of the Bureau is really to not like an unsure future, instability, and that's exactly what they have. So the anxiety level goes up. I think they had respect for Chris Wray. I know they did. Many wish that he was out there more, pounding on a podium, talking about the great work of the FBI. But I think Chris Wray chose the route of saying, I'm going to keep my head down and do the work of the Bureau. The greatest uncertainty is whether or not this is going to impact the field. I believe it is. Field officers right now are saying there's a different dichotomy going on here between headquarters and the field response. The field's saying, look, if this starts impacting us, then we'll get really loud about this. If someone's going to tell us the cases we can and cannot open, if we're not going to work cases against corrupt Republicans anymore, if we're not going to open counter-intel cases against Russians anymore, then there's going to be a loud cry from the field. At headquarters, I can tell you people are generally looking to get out. 2 assistant directors this week announced that their retirement. They were not mandatory, but they're going. They're eligible, but not mandatory. I think more is to follow.
And we'll be following all of it. Frank Figliuzzi, thank you. Andrew stays. Tonight we have reports about lawmakers who want to bring some of the people who tried to attack and in some cases sought their assassination, bring them back to the Capitol as guests. And FBI independence. We have a special report on what else you need to know. Next.
The FBI has been led by 6 directors and the second longest serving director of the FBI for the last 12 years has been an exemplary public servant, Bob Mueller.
Then President Obama discussing Bob Mueller's role there as FBI director. We are reporting on all of this in the context of the current director, Chris Wray, quitting early. I'm joined by Garrett Graff, who is the author of The FBI at War and Watergate, A New History. He's written about these issues extensively. In a recent New York Times piece, he said what Kash Patel could do to the FBI would include potentially grave and lasting harm to the institution. Former FBI General Counsel Andrew Weissman back with us. Garrett, as a sort of a historian of the Bureau, among other things, where do you see today's news fitting into the norms? How rare is it to have a director like this not only quit early, but quit after the incoming administration is the same president who hired him?
Yeah, I think it's completely unprecedented in the history of the FBI over 110 years. But more than that, it is I think, direct attack on 50 years of guardrails, safeguards, and policies that have been put in place to avoid the FBI being weaponized as it was under J. Edgar Hoover to persecute political enemies and aid political friends. And many presidents in the 50 years since Hoover have been unhappy with their FBI directors. Bill Clinton and Louis Freeh were not on speaking terms for the last 3 years of Bill Clinton's administration, so much so that Louis Freeh actually turned in his White House visitor pass to avoid an appearance of familiarity with the president. And, the idea that a FBI director would voluntarily step down simply because the president, or in this case, incoming president, was unhappy with them and the way that they were doing their job, when there's no meaningful evidence of corruption or wrongdoing by Christopher Wray in an official capacity, is astounding to me.
Yeah, I mean, let's slow down on that point because you're putting it in English for everybody. This, unlike other jobs, is not one where you report in a functional way to the president on every matter. You're governed like everyone else within the administration. But you're giving examples where there was perhaps necessary tension because that's part of the job. The notion you're saying that Wray is aware of or concerned that the sitting president in January will dislike him, that should affect him at all, let alone leave him to run from the building, is a kind of an admission. It's a kind of a problem. It would be like a referee wanting to be super popular with the players or the fans, when usually good refereeing involves some measure of the opposite.
Indeed. And I think, Andrew probably would agree with me, but I think most of the best moments of leadership for FBI directors across the last 50 years have been in moments where they have stood up to presidents who disagreed with them, who were trying to pressure them to do something that they didn't want to do. There's a famous example with Bob Mueller in 2004, where the George W. Bush's White House was attempting to get a reauthorized domestic wiretapping program. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but you both know what I'm talking about. And, Bob Mueller said, I'm not going to go along with this, and I'll resign if you proceed with this. And that was such a startling moment for George W. Bush as president that he backed down, that he changed course in the face of an FBI director standing up to him.
Yeah, Andrew, you can speak on that. And I think Garrett puts it well that if you were looking for a candidate for this job to be independent and uphold the rule of law, someone who ran from what Garrett described, the president being unhappy, that would be a reason they shouldn't be in the job in the first place.
Absolutely. Joyce Vance tells this story when she became U.S. attorney in Alabama about how Obama met with all of the incoming U.S. attorneys and said, I nominated you, but you need to know you don't work for me. You have your obligation as to the Constitution. And that's the same principle we're talking about. You played the clip of President Obama talking about Director Mueller when he left, but it's useful to remember President Obama did not select Robert Mueller. He was serving out his term, and he was kept on. Chris Wray was not selected by President Biden. He was kept on, and that's because the presidents are institutionalists who understand the purpose of a 10-year term. They understand the purpose is loyalty to the public and to the Constitution. What we're seeing both from Trump and unfortunately from Christopher Wray is a real violation of that norm, where the 10-year term is supposed to represent a real adherence to the rule of law at the FBI. And I'm very concerned about the message it's sending to the Bureau and to the 36 or so thousand people who work there.
Yeah, you mentioned then President Obama holding over what happened to be an opposing party's pick. Right. Let's take a look. We have that moment in history.
By law, FBI directors only serve for 10 years. But back in 2011, when Bob's term was up, I asked Congress to give him 2 more years. Given the threats facing our nation, we felt it was critical to have Bob's steady hand and strong leadership at the Bureau.
Garrett, Andrew mentions that. You've covered this period extensively. Final question is similar to what I asked Frank earlier. How, from your understanding, does this play out within the Bureau? You can have this political pressure from the president on down. Kash Patel is someone who's been very clear about things he wants. On his record, again, it's not for me to add opinion, Patel has stated goals that would traditionally be considered to be abuse of power or targeting. You're supposed to investigate crimes, not pick your people and go after them because the president doesn't like them. How will those type of edicts, do you think, be processed at the ground troop or rank and file level of the FBI?
Yeah, it's a tough question because in some ways this is an area where Chris Wray the way that he has kept his head down as FBI director, he has not used that public bully pulpit in the way that some previous directors have. In many ways, I think over the course of his tenure, we have seen the FBI's 55 field offices, its 400 sub-offices, its 60 legal attaches around the world become more independent from the Bureau headquarters than it was during a time, for instance, when Robert Mueller was director. Or even when James Comey was director. And so in some ways, I think the field offices are going to be trying to keep doing the work that they do day in and day out, regardless of what is taking place on the 7th floor of the Hoover Building on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. But I think what you do worry about is what Frank mentioned, which is the talent walking out the door, the people who are like, I just don't want to be part of a institution that is going to be, partisanized, weaponized, politicized like everything else in Washington. The FBI really tries to not be a political institution. And what I worry about is the good people looking at this and saying, this isn't the Bureau that I signed up for.
Yeah. Garrett and Andrew, my thanks to both of you. I want to tell folks coming up, we take a whole different turn and go to the Bronx with Fat Joe and Andrew Ross Sorkin on the beat tonight. Is Andrew jealous? Well, we will find out later. But first, Donald Trump's the FBI director quitting early today, announcing that resignation amidst the context of Donald Trump now vowing to pardon people convicted of storming the Capitol, attacking police, even sedition. It's an unprecedented undertaking. Remember, over 1,100 people have been convicted, over 600 sentenced to prison, and these are serious consequences. Some of the terms stretch over 20 years. The crimes range from assaulting police officers, which is something that has rarely ever been pardoned in U.S. history, to conspiring against the government. Republicans, after this occurred, and remember, the police that were attacked were defending the lives of these lawmakers in all parties, but the Republicans did initially condemn those acts, as Trump still praised them.
This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is.
We love you. You're very special.
The violence today was wrong and un-American.
That was a day of love.
Count me out. Enough is enough.
Those J6 warriors, they were warriors.
Incited by the President of the United States.
I will be looking at them very, very seriously for pardons.
Trump has been saying this for years. You can take him literally, because now in his first sit-down television interview since winning the election, he told NBC's Kristen Welker this will be a first-day priority. Jan 6 pardons, including for those who attacked police. So many of the same senators who were condemning that violence are now basically, according to The Hill, saying they're not going to fight Trump on this. They're not raising their voices now when it might matter. Senator Cornyn pointing the finger at the Biden pardon of Hunter and saying presidents have that prerogative. It doesn't involve Congress. Senator Lindsey Graham saying it is up to Trump. And it gets even more extreme. Republican lawmakers inviting a January 6th felon to the scene of the crime to attend Trump's inauguration. Think about that. The lack of conviction and respect for the police and self-respect for your own personal safety, that of your colleagues, your family, and your workplace, to invite the people who stormed the Capitol now back in. Trump is assembling what the New Yorker calls the most extreme cabinet ever, and that includes 2020 election deniers, as you see here, an AG pick who has also vowed to potentially prosecute prosecutors. Trump is going into this second term with few checks and balances, a direct embrace of people who use violence to try to get their way, and a Republican Party that, even though I just showed you what they said at the time, appears fine to not only normalize but empower the very people who sought their death. It is that stark. We're going to fit in a break, and then we have an update on a story that has riveted the nation, the murder of the United Healthcare CEO. We always like to change it up around here. There's a lot going on, but we have set aside some time for a very special edition of Fallback. And we have two all-stars in their field. The Bronx's multi-platinum rapper Fat Joe has been busy performing at the World Series with hits you know, like What's Love and Lean Back. The man is also a beat and fallback veteran. We love the people who have been with us from the jump. He's been here 6 times, including Bridging the Divide with Bill Crystal.
Bring this face on the air. Ratings goes up. Twitter loves us, man. I just want to send this message out to Donald Trump. It's too late, baby. Yeah, it's too late. Hip-hop music speaks for the voiceless, man.
Respect. We've seen the many sides of Joe. He has his first solo album in about 15 years, dropping Friday. The World Changed on Me. And he's now gone from collaborator, as we've seen, a great guest, to an interviewer himself on his own talk show. Fat Joe Talks, now on Stars. We're also joined by one of the most renowned financial journalists, really, of the current era, CNBC Squawk Box anchor, Andrew Ross Sorkin, a New York Times columnist, editor, founder of the very successful Deal Book franchise, which has this annual summit. Take a look.
Sam and his team have brought AI to the mainstream, one of the most iconic athletes of all time. 42nd President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Direction of travel seems to be moving towards podcasts, and the reigning queen is Alex Cooper. We always try to save the best for last. Jeff is one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs.
What we're saying is he knows people. He's also dabbled in entertainment, creating the Showtime series Billions.
Wow.
And he authored a bestseller you probably heard of, even if you didn't finish it. I read part of it, but not all of it, being honest. Too Big to Fail.
Too Big to Read.
Too Big to Read. But it does document the 2008 financial crisis and was turned into the HBO movie. Fat Joe and Andrew Ross Sorkin are here together. Welcome to both of you.
Man, I'm happy to be here, man. That's big time.
Huge respect for you.
No, that's big time. Let me tell you something. Too big to fail. That's big time.
That's
Billions.
big. You heard of that. Everybody's heard of that.
My daughter told me about Billions. My daughter's like, Dad, you got to get on Billions.
And let me tell you something. I'm going to put you on the spot. Okay? Because he's been here. He has tenure here.
Yeah.
Fat Joe has a line that became a kind of a mantra, which I bet has an economic concept. So I'm going to tell you the line, and you tell us the concept. You're the economic guy.
Oh, boy.
Yesterday's price
is not today's price.
What's that concept?
Well, so let me just understand this stuff, because I want to. I want to understand where you're coming from with yesterday's price. So yesterday's price is not today's price because it's
not.
Obviously
price
changes,
went up.
Price went up.
But the price always goes up.
Price went up.
Except sometimes it goes down.
Okay, that's your outlook. But I think everybody from a plumber to a mechanic
Inflation,
to
baby.
Ari feels like price went up.
Inflation.
I'll give you a little more context. I believe you said this when you were shouting out. I think it was the Locks.
It was Jadakiss. After the Versus, the legendary
in the Versus
hip-hop
battle. Explain.
And Jadakiss, I was explaining, I did a recap, and I was explaining to any because Jadakiss always says he's top 5, dead or alive. That's hard to say you're the top 5 rapper ever. Biggie, Tupac, this, that. But that night, he was so elite. And so when I went on a recap, I said to any promoter who's been hiring Jadakiss, just know that yesterday's price is not today's price. That's the context.
Yeah. You know what I like about it, though? It's hopeful. Because it also means that you're worth more tomorrow than you are today.
Absolutely. So what do you call that in business? If you have one valuation and now you're in a different space after whatever, more time, IPO, what's that called? We're looking for like a term.
Like a special phrase?
Yeah.
Well, it's either inflation or, a payday.
Payday.
Hopefully it's a payday.
Bing, 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 bing,
Should we give him one more quiz before we get into the fallback?
No, he got the payday.
You got the payday?
That was the word.
Payday.
Because that mantra became
That's a Juan Soto.
Yeah.
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Yeah. And then Pusha T turned it into the hook on the Diet Coke song.
Yeah. Why Diet Coke? I drink Diet Coke. It was so weird.
You know why Diet Coke?
I didn't know why Diet Coke, but
I'll tell you why, and then I'll let you finish. He says you ordered Diet Coke. That's a joke, right? Because he used to deal in products related to that term.
Oh, I didn't know. I cleared it.
Right.
Free of charge.
Right.
You know,
That's
the guys,
a payday.
when the legends try to clear my songs, I don't.
You don't even charge.
You don't charge?
Legendary. They too
Beautiful.
legendary.
I appreciate you.
How often do they call you?
West.
How often do they call you to clear your songs?
All the time. My biggest revenue stream is licensing. So like in billions and stuff like that, you might be. Well, you know, Ellen DeGeneres would come out every day to get it. I'm going to get it, pop these big checks.
Respect. I love that.
Love.
What's on your fallback list?
On my fallback list, meaning?
Anything you want to fall back. We were talking about polarization at one point, but anything on your mind?
Man, we just want everything. The world changed on us, man. This is weird. Like everything that's happening, you know, with no disrespect, the mayor's indicted, Donald Trump, a felon, is president. We don't know who the bad guy is no more. The guy who shoots the health guy, he's a Harvard guy or something. It's like, yo, he's a Valley Victorian. Like, this is confusing out here.
Yeah. I feel you on that. I mean, do you feel, Joe, like what a lot of people feel is that sort of wherever the barriers were, whoever was the authority, it's all crumbled. People don't trust the authorities, sometimes for good reason, but sometimes it gets out of hand. People cheering on. I understand the frustration with the healthcare industry. We cover that.
Me too.
Some people online starting to cheer a cold-blooded murder. Right. That's too much.
I can't do that. You know, I've been fighting for healthcare price transparency in Washington for the last 5-6 years with Power to the Patient. So I've met so many people in dire situations that didn't get the coverage, or hospital charged them so much they bankrupt. Over 100 million Americans are in debt due to healthcare. So I understand the frustration, but to go out there and become a vigilante, I can't even celebrate. Like, I'm watching people's mothers going, hero. Like, I'm like, well, I get it. You pay insurance for 10 years straight. You don't miss a payment, and then somehow you need an operation, they won't cover it. I understand your frustration on another level, but to actually take it into your own hands and murder somebody and then cheer that on, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
It's worrying me.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's worrying me because I want to have the conversation about insurance, right? We should be having the conversation about insurance. But I don't want it to be inspired by this. Yeah. Right? And what I worry about is that there is this hero worship, this fandom going on with this guy. And I just don't want to see it happen again. And I don't want other people to say, okay, we want to inspire another conversation about something else that we don't like that's going on in the business world. And there's a lot to not like that needs to get fixed. There's no question. And by the way, on the healthcare piece, there's so many things, easy things they could just, you know, if we had disclosure, transparency around insurance denials, that'd be great. But I almost don't want to have the conversation because I'm scared. I'm scared.
Yeah, but you got to have the conversation.
No.
Because it's people. All we want is fair competition. Put up your prices. Show me what you got.
100%. I just don't want to have it this week based on this guy getting murdered. That's what, and I'm worried that other people are going to be watching all of this and saying, you know what?
Impressionable people. I
don't like this. I'm going to go inspire this other conversation. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is on your list?
Well, I don't know if you see, there's all these stories, you know, a World Cup's going to Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you saw this. And a lot of people are saying, should they go? Should Saudi get this? Is this sports washing, you know, after Khashoggi's murder and everything else? And you know what? And maybe this is going to be unpopular. I think we're at a point. Look, I obviously, you know, Khashoggi's murder, a lot of the things that have gone on in Saudi, not great. But at some point, we got to figure out a way to work with folks. Maybe there's like a globalist
Saudi's
view.
a great place. I've been there.
Right. And by the way, there's a lot of things, good things that are happening there. And it's not going to happen unless we kind of figure this all out.
When I went to Saudi, the women were running the show. So, you know, so many misconceptions of places. It was a beautiful place. The people were great. They're going to have a hell of a World Cup out there. And we can see with boxing, they know how to throw an event like none other. So, I mean, you know, the United States, we're the United States, but we don't run the world.
Yeah.
Per se.
Well, it's also tricky because what you're talking about is you want to have some engagement. You say, oh, here's what's wrong with Putin and Russia. We can all agree on some of that or most of it. But there's a lot of people who live there. There's a lot of people in Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of people in Syria, as we just saw, who aren't tied to the government.
I'm not saying we should be embracing Russia. I think there's got to be lines. But I'm just saying, and I think there's been a lot of progress in Saudi, by the way, that's been undercovered in large part because the media in the U.S. largely said after the Khashoggi thing, you know what, over here.
Right, they turned on it. All right.